Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about 3 true unsettling deep-sea horror stories. This eerie tale takes place during a fishing trip, where the protagonist inherits not only their late father's fishing boat, but also his love for angling. The boat, a Rodman 1250, boasts a spacious cabin, allowing overnight deep-sea fishing adventures off the coast of Mississippi. This particular Friday, they invited their cousin, Jack McLean, along for a night of fishing and stargazing. After setting sail for approximately an hour, they reached their chosen fishing spot. The sun was setting, painting the horizon with breathtaking colors. As darkness enveloped the sea, they retreated into the cabin for a game of cards, some burgers, and of course, a few beers. However, their tranquility was soon disrupted. Jack halted the conversation, urging the protagonist to listen. In the distance, they heard the sound of a boat's engine. Intrigued, they left the cabin and strained their eyes in the inky darkness. A motorboat had approached them without any lights. The protagonist's cabin lights were on, providing ample illumination, making them easy to spot. The approaching boat, which didn't have its lights on, circled them before coming to a sudden halt. The protagonist and Jack expected it to move away into the night, but it remained motionless. The engine had been cut off, leaving only the gentle lapping of waves against their boat. Jack grew uneasy, suspecting that they were being stalked. He urged the protagonist to use the spotlight to search for the lurking boat. Despite initial reluctance, the protagonist eventually gave in to their paranoia and used the spotlight to scan the horizon. It was pitch black, but they managed to illuminate a distant boat. Before they could investigate further, the sound of the motor stopped. The boat was hidden in the darkness. They returned to the cabin, where Jack expressed his fear of being stalked. Despite their reservations, the protagonist began to sail in the opposite direction for several minutes. Once again, they stopped the boat and resumed their card game. However, they were soon interrupted when they heard the distant sound of the motorboat. This time, it was moving more quietly. Startled, they ventured outside, only to discover that the boat had come to a standstill. The protagonist agreed with Jack that it was time to use the spotlight. With bated breath, they aimed the light in the direction of the sound. The beam of light extended far into the distance. What they saw chilled their spines. They quickly turned off the light, and the protagonist steered the boat away from the area. They continued until they felt it was safe, then resumed their card game. The two remained vigilant, ensuring that they weren't followed. Finally, it seemed safe to sleep. They retired to the cabin and tried to get some rest, but the unsettling events were far from over. The protagonist awoke to thumping sounds coming from above the cabin. Disturbed, they woke Jack, and both of them listened as the thumps continued. They opened the door to the deck, and there on their boat were 2 men. One stood on the bow, and the other was on a boat floating beside theirs. Jack and the protagonist confronted the men, who raised their hands defensively. The man on their boat claimed they meant no harm and were almost out of gas. He said they had intended to knock on the cabin door to ask for assistance. Sensing something amiss, the protagonist signaled Jack to be cautious. The larger man advanced towards them, and instead of shaking his hand, the protagonist used force to push him overboard. They then ran to the boat's controls and turned the engine on. Jack made sure the men couldn't reboard their vessel. After a nerve-wracking encounter, they managed to escape the menacing pair. Fearful for their safety, they steered the boat for 2 hours straight until they reached the shore. There, they docked and decided to spend the night on the boat. The next morning, they quickly packed and headed home, shaken by their unsettling experience. To this day, the protagonist remains haunted by what those men's intentions may have been on their boat. The chilling encounter serves as a stark reminder that strange and sinister things can happen at sea, especially under the shroud of darkness. This chilling story recounts a harrowing ordeal the protagonist faced during a sailing journey from Georgia to Florida. The protagonist set sail alone on their boat, leaving their family to complete the move to their new waterfront house. With enough supplies for the trip, they spent the first day sailing for around 10 hours. The night was unsettling, as sleeping in a rocking boat proved challenging. Late at night, they heard strange, rapid thumping sounds coming from above. These noises continued, causing them to suspect that someone or something might be on the boat. Fearing the worst, they cautiously ventured outside and witnessed a splash in the water, indicating that someone or something had been on board. Panicked, the protagonist started the boat's engine to move away. They experienced another bump from something in the water, which they paid little attention to, considering their primary concern was to distance themselves from any potential threat. Several hours later, while still unable to sleep, the thumping noises resumed, louder and more distinct. The protagonist, overwhelmed with anxiety, stepped outside the cabin once more. To their surprise, they found no one on board. They decided that the noises were likely from the boat itself, dismissing any external threat, and returned to bed. However, lying awake in silence, they heard something unexpected, the sound of someone breathing. It was not their own breathing, but that of someone else in the cabin. Startled and anxious, they crept outside and locked themselves in the cockpit. Terrifyingly, they noticed an eye and a portion of a face behind the curtain that separated the cabin from the cockpit. Sailing for what felt like an eternity, they reached a narrow canal. Having called the police earlier, they arrived at the shore and found people waiting on the dock. The protagonist quickly informed the officers about the intruder on their boat. With the police's help, they managed to apprehend the trespasser. He was a disheveled man with long, wet gray hair, a beard, and a disoriented appearance. Despite being taken into custody, he refused to provide any explanation about how or when he had boarded the boat or what his intentions were. The encounter left the protagonist with a lingering sense of horror and the realization that their life was in grave danger during their nightmarish adventure. Embarking on a journey to unravel the deeper layers of an unsettling experience aboard a Norwegian cruise, we find ourselves drawn into a narrative laden with peculiar events and the harrowing repercussions of a sushi binge. As the story progresses, it becomes apparent that there is more than meets the eye during this vacation at sea. The initial days of the cruise are a delightful escape, marked by scenic vistas and a constant supply of sushi. However, after the 2-day sushi feast, our protagonist begins to feel a disorienting dizziness and lightheadedness that clouds their enjoyment. Concerned friends advise caution against sushi consumption, but the physical discomfort endures, hinting at a more sinister undercurrent. On the 3rd day at sea, things take an eerie turn. As the afternoon sun bathes the ship's deck in warm light, the protagonist decides to separate from their friends, citing their illness. They embark on a solitary journey, navigating the vast cruise liner with its myriad corridors and public spaces. An encounter with a maid provides an opportunity to ask for directions. However, the thick accent of the maid and the uncertainty of the protagonist create a communication gap, leading them down a questionable path. The maid's guidance directs the protagonist down an uninviting corridor with a tiled floor, which contrasts with the carpeted, inviting public areas. As they proceed, doubt gnaws at them. This doesn't seem like the right way to their room. The corridor is dimly lit, with some lights flickering and others extinguished entirely, creating an ominous atmosphere. Turning a corner, the protagonist encounters a sight that transcends the eerie atmosphere and plunges into the realm of the downright disturbing. A figure stands at the far end of the hallway, facing the wall. The lights play tricks on their perception, and as the figure slowly rotates to face them, it remains shrouded in obscurity. The protagonist's first impression is a void, blackness that absorbs all light. Yet, the figure is not stationary. It advances toward them. This movement is surreal. It defies the conventional notion of human locomotion. It seems to float rather than walk, adding to the disconcerting nature of the encounter. The protagonist's heart pounds. The unbearable feeling of dread clings to them. Despite the figure's disquieting presence, the protagonist retreats, opting to navigate back through the narrow hallway. The maid has vanished, and they are left to their own devices. Returning to the ship's lobby brings a measure of relief, but the sense of foreboding never leaves them. Later that evening, the protagonist retires to their cabin, still feeling the effects of their earlier malaise. The room's ambiance is soothing, and they nestle into bed hoping for a restful night. Yet fate has other plans. They awaken in the dead of night, trapped within their own body. The phenomenon known as sleep paralysis holds them in its grasp. Paralyzed, they are rendered immobile, their only faculties being the ability to move their eyes. As panic sets in, their eyes scan the room. They are held captive by an overwhelming sense of helplessness. Slowly, the unsettling realization dawns that they are not alone. In the dimly lit room, a dark figure emerges. It hovers over them, shrouded in a cloak of impenetrable darkness. While their eyes can discern no features, the figure is unmistakably there, a menacing presence. Time crawls as the figure hovers over the protagonist, who is unable to break free from their paralysis-induced nightmare. It seems to last an eternity, although it's mere minutes in reality. The figure inches closer and their fear crescendos. They are locked in a macabre dance of dread and immobility. Then, the figure's face, unfathomably dark and enigmatic, twists into an unnatural, malevolent grin. The protagonist's heart races, and in their mind's prison they scream in terror. Simultaneously, they hear their own scream echo throughout the cabin, reverberating with an intensity that is impossible in their paralyzed state. As the paralysis relinquishes its hold, they jolt awake. The room is silent, and the nightmarish encounter has dissolved into the realm of uncertainty. Their frantic breaths and pounding heart underscore the surreal experience. The transition from nightmare to reality is abrupt and unsettling. The protagonist, shaken to their core, grapples with the blurred lines between dream and reality, questioning the origins and implications of the sinister figure they encountered. The narrative delves into the interplay of the physical discomfort from sushi indulgence, the hallucinatory realms of sleep paralysis, and the persistent ambiguity of the figure in their cabin. Their journey transcends mere physical symptoms to probe the unsettling depths of the human psyche and the uncanny phenomena that can unfold in the middle of the sea.